I'm Vicki Paris Goodman, author of To Sam with Love, a surviving spouse's story of inspired grief. Welcome to part two of my three-part series. Will change the way you think about death and loss, and will have you looking forward with enthusiasm to the possibilities that life has in store for you. In this second installment of the series, I will challenge our culture's views on death and really life itself. The best part will be that the altered perspective resulting from this discussion has the strong potential to ease the grief we experience after a significant loss, even to turn our sights enthusiastically toward the future. You will soon see why. But before we dispel these notions, in order to understand why we can think of them in a far more optimistic sense, I want to talk about death. More specifically, I want to point out that we don't talk about it, not comfortably and not at length. Why is that? I'm not sure. I'm just being honest. I really don't know, but I can certainly suggest a few possibilities. Maybe it's as simple as we're not comfortable in conversations about death because we don't discuss it. And we don't discuss it because we're uncomfortable doing so. In other words, it's become a catch-22 in our culture, a circular exercise in denial that goes nowhere. Consequently, the subject is fraught with taboo. And of course, we can't ignore the fear component. Most people are afraid of dying and of how they might die. And so they project their fear onto people they know who are dealing with the death of a beloved spouse, other family member, or friend. It's sad because our fear often renders us hard pressed to support our grieving friends and relatives when supporting them is exactly what we wish we could do. And it's probably also what they wish we could do for them. Young people are especially prone to avoiding the subject of death. It's awkward and confusing. And because they believe their own death is far into the future, they question the need to even think about it, much less talk about it. So, death is the most awful, dreaded occurrence. It's the worst thing that can happen to us, to our loved ones, to our pets, or to any sentient being. It's so terrible that we can't imagine anything worse. Death is positively unspeakable. Maybe we inadvertently just happened upon the reason we don't talk about it. It's unspeakable. I was raised in a secular family by parents who thought people who believed in God were stupid, unenlightened, and foolish. Even my grandparents believed it was a given that those with faith in God lacked logic and wisdom. These believers deluded themselves into faith in something for which there was, in my parents' and grandparents' minds, little evidence and no proof, all for the purpose of comforting themselves during times of trouble and heartache. In other words, people who believed in God, who needed God, were weak. To my parents and grandparents, it was the secular non believers who were the strong ones, the ones who depended on nothing and no one to bolster them during hard times. They would support themselves without the need to engage in what my parents and grandparents regarded as religious or spiritual make believe. In episode one, I related a bit of the story as to how I arrived at and strengthened my belief in God and the afterlife, and I've never looked back. My faith is as strong as ever, and it continues to grow. I told the rest of that story in To Sam with Love. I am filled with gratitude for the revelations that came to me soon afterwards regarding life and death. So now for the startling question. Are you ready? Here it is. Is death really tragic? Is it even a bad thing at all? Let's get into this question more deeply. Most people believe in a benevolent higher power and in an afterlife. That afterlife is generally acknowledged to be an indescribably beautiful place where souls can spend eternity surrounded by a love so powerful and all consuming that it is not possible for us to comprehend it here on earth. Some who have had near-death experiences describe having known everything while they were on the other side. It's logical that a oneness with an all-knowing God avails souls of his knowledge of history, physics, mathematics, and everything else. Just think about this. Maybe even pause the episode for a few seconds to take it in. We have been so conditioned to awfulize death that we don't connect the dots. This social construct of Western cultures makes us so afraid of death and dying that we can't see straight when it comes to the logic and reason surrounding this mindless perceptual autopilot. So I'll ask the question another way. Why do we treat death as the worst of the worst in terms of life events? If the beauty, knowledge, and perfection of the afterlife is so exquisite as to be beyond our comprehension, what exactly is terrible about dying? I'll be honest with you, I have plans and goals. For example, there are places to which I'd like to travel. I have another book in the works, and I very much want to finish writing it. I have friends and a man in my life who I enjoy spending time with. I love my house and my surroundings. I want to see more plays, attend more concerts, and read more books. I'm not even sure I've enjoyed enough chocolate ice cream sodas in my lifetime to say I've had enough of them. Okay, that last one was a little silly. The point is, the list of things I want to do is long, and I mentioned just a few of the things on that list, but you get the idea. So, does this mean we're on Earth to accomplish certain goals, to learn things, maybe even to teach others? I have no doubt of it. And I also trust God to determine when my work on Earth is done. Writing for Psychology Today, Robert Lanza persuasively states, "We believe in death because we've been taught we die. Also, of course, because we associate ourselves with our bodies, and we know bodies die." So, a part of our conditioning with regard to death is to conflate the body and the soul as if they are inseparable. Many of us have acknowledged that body and soul are separate entities, but that cultural conditioning creeps in to make us forget that detail and to set it aside. That detail is crucial to our proper understanding of death and must not be casually discarded. Eben Alexander is a neurosurgeon who had a vivid near-death experience that turned his secular outlook inside out. Dr. Alexander says, the brain itself does not produce consciousness, that it is instead kind of reducing valve or filter, shifting the larger non-physical consciousness that we possess in the non-physical worlds down into a more limited capacity for the duration of our mortal lives. In other words, it is our brains that limit our soul's comprehension of the universe while we are here on Earth. Once we cross over to the afterlife, there is no such constraint on what we can know and understand. Perhaps you can now begin to see that we need not fear death or think of it as terrible. After all, what comes afterwards is far greater and more fulfilling than life on earth. And if we are faced with the death of the love of our life, we can know that God's plan was for them to cross over to the afterlife in advance of our own transition, and that we will join them there later. This insight should enable us as surviving spouses to achieve renewed contentment, even enthusiasm for the future as we await our turn to join the soul of our deceased spouse in the afterlife. I think the implications are enormous. Even so, there is one other aspect of the death of a spouse that may trip up a survivor's recovery. So let's talk about it. Because as with the concept of death, a shifted way of thinking has the potential to bring a brighter outlook to the surviving spouse. There seems to be an ideal life to which many people aspire. Among other things, it consists of one happy marriage to one spouse that ends after 6 or 7 decades together when both have lived into their 80s or 90s. And this is the way life plays out for some couples. But what if you were not one of those couples? What if your spouse dies, as mine did, when you were in your 60s, maybe even earlier? You may have many years of your life left for you to live. Because of this fact, maybe you believe you've been cheated or were dealt an unlucky hand. Here's the insight God blessed me with on this subject. It is apparent to me that God has a plan for each of us. What we do with that plan must certainly depend, at least to a degree, on our free will. The plan is in place, and it is there to teach us various lessons that God means for us to learn during our time on earth. Extending that notion to the subject at hand, we can assume that God's plan for some of us is to spend our entire life with one person. For others, God's vision is more compartmentalized, if you will, more segmented. To put it differently, some of us are meant to live out portions of our lives in different ways and with different people. When I think of my husband Sam's death that way, I don't feel at all cheated or unlucky. Instead, I feel blessed to have been with Sam for the duration of our marriage until he died. And I feel equally blessed to have the opportunity to embark on this next chapter, which so far has been satisfying and productive, even exciting. Who is to say that life with one person is superior to a life comprised of segments that may place us in committed relationships with two or more people? And this question brings up another important point worth some discussion. I've spoken to a number of surviving spouses who say they feel guilty, even disloyal to their deceased spouse if they move on with any degree of satisfaction and happiness. Some also report feeling self-conscious about having sex with a new partner, rightly believing that their spouse might be watching from the afterlife. I think of it this way. Souls in heaven are surely perfected by the unimaginable, all encompassing love with which they are surrounded. Furthermore, they are no longer limited by physical brains, so they understand everything. From this, we can only conclude that negative human emotions like jealousy, anger, and insecurity are non existent in the afterlife. Given these truths, it naturally follows that the souls of our deceased spouses want only what will make us the happiest, make us feel the most loved during the time we have left here on earth. How could it be any other way? One last thing. These days, when something disruptive happens, be it a bad hair day or a major life disturbance, before reacting, I remind myself that there is a lesson to be learned from the perceived misfortune. When I think of it that way, I remember that it's all part of a plan to afford me certain lessons and experiences during my life on earth. And I can see the futility in pouting, yelling, or just thinking myself to have been unlucky. There is a reason it happened, and I best think about God's intended takeaway. I trust these concepts have upended the way you think of life and death. They certainly upended mine. And I know that recognizing the significance of God's plan for you will help you to more constructively face life's adversity. In episode 3, I'll tell you about my uplifting book, To Sam with Love, a surviving spouse's story of inspired grief. It chronicles some of Sam's life and a little of my own, our time together, his terminal cancer diagnosis and treatment, and the surprising and inspiring things that happened to me after his death. Please visit inspiredgrief.com for the best pricing currently available for my book, To Sam with Love. You've probably got just a few days left until these 3 pop-up podcast episodes go away forever. But I have a special offer for you. If you buy 2 copies of To Sam with Love, I will give you 2 things. One is my bonus content offer, Solutions for Your Bright Future, which will give you answers to problems that may arise as you embrace your new life. These include a cheat sheet of exciting activities and opportunities to pursue, solutions to dilemmas like how to reassure friends and relatives who are uncomfortable being around you given your loss, and much more, as well as a personal activity log for you to track your progress. The second part of this bonus offer is lifetime access to this 3-episode pop-up podcast series. You can redeem this offer by going to inspiredgrief.com/offer to submit a copy of your proof of purchase of 2 copies of To Sam with Love. Along with this 3-episode pop-up podcast series you are currently listening to, my book, To Sam with Love, will serve as your roadmap to happily looking forward to your life's wonderful next chapter. Thank you for listening.